Now, business news, and the biggest commercial event on the planet is also taking place in Qatar. The 2022 World Cup has generated revenues of $7.5 billion for FIFA. That's $1 billion more than football's international governing body earned in the 4 years leading up to the Russian tournament in 2018. And that's despite the risks associated with sponsoring an event held in Qatar with brewer Anheuser-Busch, which learned to its peril last week when organizers banned the sale of beer in stadiums. Well, for more on the money side of the World Cup, let's cross over to London to speak to Arise business correspondent Laurie Laird. Good to see you, Laurie. The World Cup, of course, big business, billions of dollars, everything from tourism to merchandising to food and drink. A lot of controversy, though, but still the records are being broken.
Isn't that a bit of a surprise, Charles? I think many of us would have assumed that there would be fewer dollars in the sponsorship simply because Qatar is a different sort of place. The World Cup has not ever been held in a place where the social norms are so very different to the norms in countries where you tend to see the biggest sponsorship dollars come from. And some of the biggest sponsors here are Coca-Cola, Anheuser-Busch, and InBev, which owns Budweiser, which definitely had a bit of a shock last week when it learned that it could no longer sell beer within the stadium. So it is a little bit of a surprise because so many of these sponsors run the risk of hypocrisy, run the risk of various human rights groups criticizing their decision to put so much money into this tournament. But before we go further into that, Charles, there is one reason, and there is one reason only, that these sponsors are still flocking to this event, and that is an estimate of 5 billion pairs of eyes watching this tournament. At some point, that could be half of the world's population that is watching this. And this comes at a time where advertisers and sponsors are having such a difficult time in reaching people through conventional television because so many of us consume our television through streaming. If we want to watch entertainment, we might look at a streaming service, and we might look at watching episode after episode rather than television when you and I were young, Charles, where you had to wait an entire week to see the next episode, and television was peppered with advertisements. So this event comes at a time where television advertising has been turned on its head, and it really is these live sporting events like the Olympics, like the Super Bowl in the U.S., and like the World Cup. One of the just a handful of events where advertisers have a captive television audience.
Well, obviously, you meant to say when you were young, Laurie. Because I don't remember
television when you were young, right, Charles?
I don't remember what you're talking about. I'm still in diapers. In any case, you do have a good point there, actually. I do remember Anheuser-Busch, though. That tells you that I'm not a spring chicken. And certainly the banning of beer inside the stadium has pointed to the hazards of sponsorship, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And there haven't been any sponsors that have come out publicly and said, wow, what happened to Anheuser-Busch was very concerning for us. And has FIFA actually civilly violated the contracts here? Lots of these conversations are going on privately, but none of the big sponsors have been willing to put their head above the parapet and say, hey, we are really concerned about the money that we have spent on this. But there are lots of conversations going on in private. That said, will we see sponsorship rise for the next World Cup, which is being held in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada? Absolutely, Charles. Mostly for the reasons that I just mentioned. Live sports is one of the only places where these people can make money.
There's quite a lot to talk about still, but I want to try and we've got about 2 minutes or so, Laurie, so let's try and squeeze in some stuff that we're coming across here. Disney axing its CEO. What's the story there?
unbelievable story here. Disney, which we always have thought of as a license to print money, has got rid of its CEO. Bob Chapek is the guy who has left. He's being replaced by Bob Iger. A lot of people are saying this is the return of the Jedi, of course, because Disney has bought Lucasfilms, which is the owner of the Star Wars franchise. But what it comes down to is that Disney Plus, the streaming service, which is flummoxing advertisers, the streaming idea, is losing Disney an unbelievable amount of money because of that $1.5 billion in losses at Disney Plus. Disney, across the whole group, profits went down 90% in the third quarter. So it was thought of enough is enough with Bob Chapek. We're looking at Bob Iger right here, who is the newcomer and old-comer. He had been the head of Disney for 15 years. But it's interesting because Chapek's contract was just renewed a couple of months ago. Disney had said with trepidation, we're going to stick with this guy, but it looks like not for much longer.
And just before we go, we've got about 30 seconds or so, Laurie. Shall we check in with Twitter? What's the latest?
Yeah, and I can do this in 30 seconds. Kanye West is now back in. His account is being reinstated along with Donald Trump over the weekend. Alex Jones, who has denied the deaths of those children in Sandy Hook in a gun massacre a couple of years ago, he is still out. And I will update you tomorrow because it seems like there is always something happening with Twitter these days.
There, didn't you? Laurie, thanks very much indeed. Laurie Laird, Arise business correspondent, talking to me there from London.